12 hours. Not too many people got to experience it, but for 12 hours, League of Legends was a post-apocalyptic battlefield. And it wasn't a test. This wasn't on PvE. This dropped onto live servers. It emerged on the front lines, in front of League's most innocent players. And well, as they say, innocence is the first thing to die. And so people witnessed atrocities as the game started to crumble. And I really mean the game was falling apart. This all kinda happened as a chain of unfortunate and unintended events. But for a brief moment, Summoner's Rift was on fire regardless. And thankfully, all the issues I am about to show you got fixed fairly quickly. The fact that these things happened at all is a whole another topic. And it all happened while this patch was supposed to be a celebration. Also, needless to say, a lot of the footage you're about to see comes from Vandiril. So if you're interested in these kinds of apocalyptic events, I think everyone knows he is the main hub to watch these live. With that said, let's go to the beginning and let's have a look at how all of these events started. With the deploy of patch 13.20. At this point, everyone knows that all of these start on PvE. That's where everything gets tested first. It is most likely not because Riot would be necessarily looking for possible changes. If anything, the proof is that skins rarely get changed. That's not counting Syndra. PvE exists more to see if things break the game, which is why it's funny to see that all of this happened. But on that fateful day, on PvE, Riot started testing Nexus Blitz, a game mode that was long awaited by many people. In fact, during the summer event, while a lot of people have been enjoying the new arena game mode, others were complaining that it is not Nexus Blitz. And that was their only critique. But while some people were having fun fooling around in Nexus Blitz, on live servers on Summoner's Rift, patch 13.20 started spiraling out of control. And it all started with the breaking of champions. The first one who got hit hard was Illaoi. Apparently, when Briar was released, there was a bug where Illaoi couldn't use her E on her. She was essentially immune to Illaoi's main ability. I don't believe it was ever confirmed why that happened. But when you look at how it was fixed, we get a good hint. It was likely due to the fact that Briar has two states of her resource bar. In her normal state, she has none. But then she also gets her frenzy bar when she's in frenzy. The thing is, when Illaoi pulls out your soul, that ability is looking for the bars, because it needs to know the health value to create the spirit. But also, for some reason, it looked at the other bar, and if the other bar didn't exist, the soul would get sucked back into the body. But now you may be wondering, well, that's weird, this bug never worked on someone like Garen before. He also doesn't have a resource bar. But that's most likely because the bug had to do something with Briar's two states of the bar. What I assume happened is that through all the spaghetti, Illaoi's E looked for the state of her frenzy bar. And if she was in her frenzy state, she would have a valid value there and therefore the ability would work fine. Which, by the way, yes, Illaoi's E only worked on her when she was in frenzy. This is what was teased in the fix. But by default, that frenzy bar would be empty. Meaning that if Illaoi used her E on her when she was in her default state, it would return the value 0. So then what happened is that every time the clone was created, the game looked at the value of her bar in her second state and thought she had 0 health. But since you can only create a clone with positive health, because the point is for your team to beat it down, the clone just couldn't be created. This is just what I believe happened. But in reality, who knows? It's like going into an Italian restaurant. Well, the good news is that still within the patch 13.20, Riot managed to fix that bug. And the bad news is that by doing so, they broke 5 other champions. They fixed the issue where Illaoi was looking for the wrong bar, so now it worked on Briar even when she didn't have a bar, and in return it broke for every other champion who didn't have a mana bar by default. Meaning champions like Garen, Riven, Karurina, Mundo and Zac were immune to her. The amazing thing about all of these is that most of these are top laners, who are Illaoi's natural opponents, which turned Illaoi into a piece of brick. But thankfully, even though this did go out onto live servers, it did get fixed. So naturally, another champion got broken. Next, somehow, Tryndamere got destroyed, and his win rate dropped by nearly 10%, which doesn't sound like an absolute apocalypse, until you realize that he just lost half of what he could do. The reason why his win rate stayed above 40% at all is because statistically he is not playing alone and so other people can still carry him. But for something to even approach 40% win rate, they have to be really broken. So how did this happen, you might ask? Well, after checking the patch notes, you might see that Tryndamere was not even mentioned there. And it all comes from a hilarious bug. Somehow, in some way, Riot changed how Tryndamere's E scanned for hits. Normally, if anything overlapped a sphere around Tryndamere, the damage would be applied. But through some spaghetti magic, now the spell only scanned for its root. In other words, Tryndamere could only ever deal the damage if the enemy overlapped the center of his hitbox. Which also means that unless you tried to target the enemy specifically with your body, you essentially only had 3 abilities. Your E would do nothing but nudge you forward. Which is funny because, who knows, maybe this is why he was still 3% above being broken. I mean, his right click still worked. But the best part about this bug is that it was on PBE for 2 weeks, which apparently was the same case for Illaoi too. And somehow, it didn't get fixed. You see, Syndra mains? You're taking the resources from that. But once again, this went live for half a day and then it got fixed. So next, naturally, the entire jungle got broken. Now, half of these happened because of an unfortunate interaction, but the other half is simply related to the rebalancing of jungle. And the one who suffered the most was Shaco. You see, Shaco has a very unique way of clearing jungle. Of course, he has to be the special one. He drops down his boxes, lets them to kill the camp, and while they are doing it, he runs towards the next camp. And for the longest time, Shaco was balanced around this. But during 13.20, Shaco was just entirely overlooked. And with that, he turned from one of the best junglers in the game to the worst one in the entire game. The change that caused this is simple. Riot changed the jungle camp so they would only give you full XP if you are standing inside the camp. Meaning that if Shaco puts down his boxes and then walks away, he would be too far to get the full XP. So the only way for him to jungle was to just stand there and kill the monsters like every other normal jungler. I said normal, Ivern doesn't count. Anyway, the issue with Shaco is that he was balanced around his special clears. So now, Shaco simply became another bricked champion this patch. But thankfully, it was a bug, not a feature. Freak confirmed he found the bug and the team fixed it. So in the end, all things were good, right? Illaoi's tentacles worked, Tryndamere could actually cut people, and Shaco became a nightmare once again. So things were good. Right? Oh no, they were not. Because somehow, in some way, the world's map, which was previously tested on PBE, went onto the live servers. And all hell broke loose. Under normal circumstances, this would be the Summoner's Rift. See all those walls? They are terrain pieces which would block your path. See all those bushes? They serve to conceal you from the enemy. And see all of those flowers? They are interesting vantage points that would vary your gameplay. But not that day. Walls? Merely a suggestion. On that faithful day, they did not exist. Bottom Krugs didn't have them. Bottom red buff kept spawning with random elements of the elemental dragons. Though the top red buff, he's just gone. It is literally just a hole into the void. What a way to give us a lore event. Fountains? Who needs them? The grass is all you'll realistically need. But historically, we know that the top side has always had a worse win rate. So, there is no helping them now, so they don't get anything. And I really mean, there's nothing. Also, you know about all of those flowers that are supposed to spice up your gameplay? Nah, we don't need them. Why should they matter? Why should you use them to jump over walls when the walls don't exist? Instead, why don't we spawn literally all of them at once in the bottom fountain? Meaning that all 4 blast cones, 2 vision flowers and all the honey fruit would be just sitting there. They are all still functioning, but as I said, they won't help topside anyway. Also, you know about the bushes? Well, they are merely an illusion. Some of them exist, and yet they don't. And some of them don't exist, and yet they do. Also, you think there is a proper infernal dragon terrain? Nah, it is an illusion. The base terrain is still underneath it, that's why you can't see through it. But not all of these illusions are complete illusions. For example, blue buff kept spawning with that extra terrain. I mean, the terrain was not really there, you could walk through it, but for some reason you can still get stuck in the middle of it. And in the end, what's simply absolutely amazing about all of this is that all of this happened on live servers. From what I know, it likely happened because Riot just pushed the world's map onto live servers a bit too early. They tried to do it because it would line up with the beginning of Worlds. And as a result, some of the dragons broke. Specifically, Mountain Drake and Camtech Drake kept overwriting the entire plane, but also plans had invalid coordinates, which meant that they all spawned at their default coordinates, which would be 0, 0. And that simply lines up with the bottom fountain. Yes, it is another proof that bottom side is Riot's favorite side. But thankfully, at the end of the day, literally, Riot managed to fix all of this. But for about 12 hours before it happened, Summoner's Rift was perhaps in the buggiest state it has ever been in. And I highly recommend watching other people's videos on these because things were getting hilarious. And of course, if you'd like to see more of these bugs, I heavily recommend checking out Vandiril because recently, Riot accidentally turned Jinx into a maniac, even more than before, and apparently Briar now goes into a full frenzy. Like, she's done distinguishing friends from foes. But to be honest, it is lore accurate. Was this also done by the IP team?